Our main speaker is Adam Copeland to talk with us about a topic that I've been very interested in, something called crowdfunding. And those of you who especially are in our online audience, you know that you received in your invitation that we were going to fund this through crowdfunding. In other words, if you like the idea, you're going to support it. So we're going to see how that works out, and Adam's going to teach us a little bit about that. All right, Adam, welcome.
Thanks. Obrigado. Thanks. I'm still Adam Copeland. I'm still from Luther Seminary. Here I am again. And I'd be negligent if I didn't just give a quick shout out to something that Luther Seminary puts out every week as an e-newsletter on stewardship. So if you go to Luther Seminary or Luther Seminary, or is it luthersem.edu/stewardship, that's the page for the Center for Stewardship Leaders. And there's a link there to subscribe to the e-newsletters. Every Tuesday morning, we send out a newsletter to folks. At the moment, we're doing a series on funding the next church. After that, Matthew Skinner is going to write about Acts and giving in Acts and how that affects giving today. So it's one of the great things I walked into. When you start a new position, you try to see what things have been happening for you not to screw up. And that e-newsletter was definitely one of them. It goes out to more than 4,000 people every week, so check it out. Today, though, I'm going to be talking about crowdfunding the church. And to start, though, so crowdfunding is this new thing. I'm going to start with a historical example. It's 1917, and this is the Journal of Glenn D. McMurray. It was published of an autobiography about his life in rural Kansas. And McMurray writes that he grew up in a Methodist church, and this is how he describes giving in their congregation when a particular need arose in this rural Methodist congregation in 1917. The leader of the finance committee would explain to the congregation what the particular need for the money was and how much needed to be raised. The secretary would write the financial goal on the board, and then the chair of the meeting would ask, who will give $25? As hands went up, the secretary would write down those hands, and then the chair would ask, who will give $20? Those names would be recorded, who will give $10? And McMurray said, usually they were able to get what they needed. This happened in this autobiography was published in 1917, but the story is an early vision of crowdfunding, long before the internet was even thought of. Today, crowdfunding has potential for congregations, nonprofits, and generally, I think it helps us shift our idea of fundraising and giving. I come at this with the theological claim that the Spirit works in many mysterious ways, even on the internet. And God may be doing a new thing in our midst. So let's think about crowdfunding and how we might be able to catch up to the Spirit. So how many of you have backed a project on a website called Kickstarter or Indiegogo, something like that? Nice, about, or maybe 20%. People on the live feed, you can tweet your answers. Okay, so crowdfunding, this word I keep using, may be new to some of you, and that's okay. It was just started in 2009, so this is all a new concept. It started in 2009, and this year it's expected to raise $5 billion. That's with a B. A few weeks ago, Fargo, where I used to live, hosted a startup weekend for would-be entrepreneurs to come together. They had 30 hours to think of a business idea, make a pitch, make a plan. And there was this article in the newspaper on Saturday about the 3 business plans that won the startup weekend. The reporter asked, how do you plan to fund these new startup ideas? Every one of them responded through crowdfunding. So what is it? I'm going to give you the sort of academic definition, and then I'll break it down. Here's Ethan Mollick's definition. It's accurate, it's a little wordy, but crowdfunding refers to the efforts by entrepreneurial individuals and groups, cultural, social, and for-profit, to fund their ventures by drawing on relatively small contributions from a relatively large number of individuals using the internet without standard financial intermediaries. All right, let's break that down. You've got one person, or maybe a group, a nonprofit, a congregation over here. They've got an idea. What they don't have, though, is money. And so they ask all the people, hey, will you fund my idea? And if you do, I'm even going to help you out and support you with some gifts or perks, these are often called, or rewards for supporting the idea. So say probably one of the biggest sectors of crowdfunding is among artists and musicians. And so they'll say, I've got enough songs now for a new disc. If I need $10,000 though to go to the studio, make it happen. If you give me 25, I promise that once the project's done, I'm going to send you an electronic copy and a CD of the recording session. So that type of exchange is often part of crowdfunding, but not necessarily part of it. The two most common sites for crowdfunding are Indiegogo and Kickstarter. There's hundreds, literally hundreds of crowdfunding platforms out there. New ones come out every day. I think it's actually the industry is going to come together a little. There's some buyouts going on, but I'm just going to talk briefly about those two most popular. Indiegogo is often used by independent artists, that sort of thing, and they allowed for flexible funding of campaigns that can be successful. If you have an idea for $20,000 and you only get $15,000 in funding, Indiegogo, if you just select that kind of campaign, it's fine. Like, hey, we'll still give you the $15,000. Don't worry about it. Kickstarter, though, is sort of this true classic crowdfunding. They say, if you have a goal and you don't meet it, that's fine. All the people, though, who gave will get their money back, and you're going to have to go find out a new way to fund your project. If you think about the logic behind this, is saying, like, if it's a $20,000 goal, and you had to have $20,000 to make it come to be, if you don't get it, then we're not going to even try to make it happen. So if those handbells, to use that example, cost $20,000, you only got a $15,000 gift, you just don't have a handbell choir yet. So that's the notion around the Kickstarter's approach. There's some other, tons of these out there, which some other crowdfunding platforms are GoFundMe, YouCaring, CrowdRise, and then Wheat Ridge Ministries has a site with a Christian emphasis called We Raise. All right, so what the heck does this have to do with the church? Well, not much if we decide for it not to. We can certainly think of crowdfunding as this fad. It's for those people on the fringe, and it doesn't have anything to do with stewardship. If I were to make a broad generalization about churches and stewardship, we tend to do our own thing, and rather than learn from the best practices of nonprofits, development, and business. That narrative budget stuff, that not giving a report to your shareholder stuff, when you get the annual report from the local nonprofits in your area, they're not sending you the 2 pages Excel spreadsheet of their annual budget. They're telling the story. So on my lesser days, I think that church often, when we talk about stewardship and money, we tend to do our own thing and not learn from others. So what if we experimented with crowdfunding, as we're doing tonight with the online audience? What if the practices around asking for money and we tried to cast a new vision that drew others in? What if we gave it a shot? Because just maybe God's doing a new thing, and even if we fail, we'll learn something in the process. So tonight I'm going to share some examples of congregations that have tried and have succeeded, and a little bit about what they've learned. A few years ago, Humble Walk Lutheran Church in St. Paul launched an $8,000 campaign on Kickstarter. By the way, there's a video as part of that campaign. They shot the video in one take using a cell phone. So the idea was simple. They, through a grant, had local artists come and sort of be guest artists and lead worship in their community for a month at a time for a full year. And they, at the end of the year, said, wait a second, we've got all these new songs. Let's ask the artists to record this, and we want to share these songs with the community. But they didn't have the $8,000 or so it would take to make that happen. So they launched the project. It succeeded. They got $9,059, and more than 130 people backed the project. I talked to Jody Hogue, the pastor there, if the campaign was successful, and I love her language to describe it. You can just hear her sort of missional theology coming out. Jody said, "Sure, we not only funded the CD project, but we got to give this art away for free to the big old world. Artists got to write songs. Our studio people got to do what they are created to do. We get to give it all away, and we got to invite others along in the process." That type of spirit of connecting to spiritual gifts, of casting a vision and inviting people to come along with it is at the heart of crowdfunding. I think Jody adds theological language to that beautifully. So Humble Walk had an $8,000 project. Here's a congregational project for $150,000. It's the most creative use of crowdfunding by a church-related organization I've seen. It's also the most complicated to explain. So I never do this quickly, but here it goes again. All right. It's launched by Broad Street Ministry and Hospitality Cooperative. It's a ministry in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. They launched a $150,000 campaign. They raised almost $180,000. Here's the pitch. They made this little image here. So it's they called it the Radical Hospitality and the Rooster Soup Company. They have a hospitality cooperative, which is sort of what they call their sort of service and mission agency that worked with a lot of homeless guests in the community. And so they was trying to raise money for that mission in the congregation, what they call the hospitality cooperative. They said, and they did this in partnership with some community organizations, a local restaurateur, precisely. So there's this great restaurant in Philadelphia. They serve two things, fried chicken and donuts. Actually, they also serve coffee, but fried chicken, donuts, coffee. And they have all these leftover chicken parts at the end of the day, and they were having to spend money to get rid of the chicken. The restaurateurs and the congregation thought up this idea, wait a second, what if we used that leftover chicken from Federal Donuts, the restaurant, and helped fund a new restaurant called Rooster Soup Company that used that leftover chicken to make chicken stock. And then once we started this new restaurant called Rooster Soup Company, the money raised from that restaurant would go back into the congregation. And Broad Street Ministry would have, if they get $3 as a donation, they can buy one meal of social services. If they completed that campaign, look how they're telling the story here. If they completed the campaign, they'd serve 60,000 meals that year. They'd have mail service for 1,700 people. If you're homeless, having an address to receive mail is really important. And they'd be able to create 11,000 personal care packages. They cast this vision. If we do this, this is how this is what will happen. And I love they're partnering with restaurateurs, one of which was sort of secular Jewish, one of whom is atheist, and so they're trying to connect the whole Philadelphia community and beyond. So they crafted language very intentionally that drew people in. I love the spirit of this language because it says if you give to Radical Hospitality Rooster Soup Company, it's better than a one-time gift. Instead of one-time donation, you help build a perpetual money machine. Nearly free chicken stock in, jobs and donation out. Does that sound unusual? That's because it is. This congregation thinks of itself as somewhat like the research and development department of the church itself. They want to think about these big ideas and see if it comes together, and it did. Andy Greenhow, the minister for Stewardship, Congregational Partnership, and Belonging there, described the language they used in developing that campaign. He said, in writing the Kickstarter language, we honed in on shared values, what we called radical hospitality, shared by the restaurateurs and Christians. We wanted to remove all the barriers for the desire to participate, have very little churchy language, no mentioning the J word. I think that's Jesus. And focus on shared values and a compelling civic vision. They were successful. They now have a location for the restaurant, and it's about to launch in the coming months. Big idea, exciting project. If they didn't get the $150,000, they weren't going to do it, but they got $180,000, and now it's coming into being. This is a sort of smaller project. This is the Garden Church. in San Pedro, California. They worked with Razoo.com, that's another crowdfunding platform. They had a $4,000 campaign. Backers could give as normal, but I also they connect with Razoo and set up a way to give recurring gifts, like a monthly donation. I think of this like NPR, sort of sustaining giving style. I talked to the pastor, Anna Wolfenden, and she said they learned a lot through the process. The fundraising, she learned, is really hard. It takes a lot of work, and it's deeply rewarding and inspiring to gather people together around a cause that matters. They got some good press for their new congregation. And I said, something we also didn't consider, but those folks outside of our community or on the edges of our community who gave for the first time, now we have, now because they gave, we know they're already inspired by our vision, and so we have their information and may ask them to give again in the future. Once you give once, you're much more likely to give again. Finally, the table ministry. Last fall, the Hot Metal Bridge, another fun church name, Hot Metal Bridge Faith Community in Pittsburgh, they faced a difficult budget cycle. They were going through lots of grant dollars, and they had to, as they were looking for the next year's budget, they proposed cutting the position of table minister. This was a part-time position, a coordinator of a meal and hospitality for the homeless. They launched a campaign for $8,500 to help to pay part of the salary for this position, and they raised $10,700. How did it happen? Here's the story. Jennifer Freyer Giggs, who is the table minister whose position was going to be cut, heard about this, and she just asked on Facebook one night, hey, if I launched a crowdfunding campaign, would you support it? And lots of her friends said, yeah, sure, go for it. So she went back to the finance council, and they prayed, and then Jen dove in. They had one meeting, and then they went for it. I like that sort of, let's give it a shot. Let's see if it works. If not, that's okay. We didn't have much to lose, she said, so we went for it, and it worked. That's the spirit of crowdfunding. It's you throw an idea out there, and you see if it sticks. You give people an opportunity to give, and you might be surprised, but either way, you'll learn something in the process. And so they raised over $10,000 for the campaign. So I'm not proposing we jettison our regular fall stewardship campaigns. I am proposing this clip art is offensive to God, but that's another topic. But the power of digital tools and easy-to-use crowdfunding platforms give the church an opportunity to gain financial gifts for God's glory in new ways. So if your congregation, if your nonprofit, if your group thinks about crowdfunding as a possible approach, how might you proceed? Crowdfunding works best for creative ideas that people care about. When you support a campaign, you support something you want to see exist in the world. Crowdfunding won't help keep the lights on in your church. It probably won't even fix the organ, though I love organs dearly, but it may fan new flames for innovation in ministry in your congregation and the community in new ways to love and serve. It might also push you to connect to the community in new ways. So to start, look around your context. What new thing do you want to see exist in the world? And maybe not just exist for your church, but exist for your community. The whole point is to expand beyond your usual network. You can ask folks in your congregation to give on Sunday or through the newsletter. Think about the community. What idea might be fun to share on social media? These things are all about sharing them on Facebook and Twitter. What might be fun for people in your community to share around? What might get good press? Just some easy examples. What if your community needed a new playground in your church's neighborhood, or a new ministry you've always been wanting to start but haven't started because the money wasn't available? Renovation for something related to the community needs, or something that a local school needed to buy a certain thing that a school that your congregation is close to or supports. What might people beyond your church support? Because the hope is to get this campaign beyond your usual network of givers. Let's excite them, let's bring them into it, but let's also expand the vision. Then craft language that appeals to all. A crowdfunding campaign is not the time to quote from the Book of Concord. It's a time to draw people in, to diverse persons of faith and non-faith who want to give to make something happen. So use language accordingly. There's exceptions, of course, but I think I'm most drawn to personally crowdfunding campaigns that are launched by Christian communities that are trying to connect beyond just Christian communities. That said, there's certainly ways to do this for Christian causes or for mission trips. Or I just ran into a campaign recently on Facebook. Somebody wanted to raise $1,000 to help her fund her seminary tuition, and she got it in 6 days. I'm drawn to the possibilities of expanding that donor base, but you don't want to limit. If your Bible camp wanted to organize a campaign for a certain amount of money and wanted to connect to previous campers, previous counselors, congregations in the area, that's fine too. It's helpful to have a particular ask and a particular vision you want to create and help it come to being. I'm going to speed through these last 2 slides really fast. They'll be on the internet, so you can check them out. But so I think crowdfunding helps me think about what are some just new giving patterns generally. Traditional giving usually occurs relatively privately. You put that money on the plate, no one knows. Crowdfunding, though, encourages sharing via social networks, online, public appeals. Traditional giving starts first because of an in-person relationship. The internet allows giving to people or ideas that you have no personal relationship with. Crowdfunding is about traditional giving is about organizational giving, likely giving to an institution because we like this institution, because we sort of the brand or whatever. Crowdfunding and digital giving generally is motivated by a cause, a mission, something click-worthy, something that draws people in. Traditional giving is about, we generally don't discuss giving habits. That's part of where that question comes from. We're not used to that. But crowdfunding is like, wait a second, it's about sharing giving habits, saying, I just gave to this campaign. I'm excited about it. I want you to be excited about it. Here's a link, give. It's not about giving out of religious obligation, but giving out of personal choice, transactional consumer mentality, and it's using that approach as an important tool. Traditional giving might be about giving to support the common good, and crowdfunding is about giving to make a new idea or possibility come into being. It's about casting that vision and seeing if we can catch it. Crowdfunding the church, it's a thing. It's a powerful tool for creative works, for new ideas, for funding passion. And it's at least worth considering as a way to join God's mission in the world, in person and online. Thanks.
Thank you, Adam. Well, we have just about 3 or 4 minutes for questions.
Any questions from in the room? Yeah, right up here.
Is the giving always done electronically?
Is the giving always done electronically? No. You can always track it electronically, but if your congregation, if they get a check for a crowdfunding campaign, there's a way to put that in to the campaign. So like it raises the total because of a gift that didn't come in. Yep. Different platforms are a little different on that, but generally that's the approach.
2 quick questions. Are there fees involved with this program, and also are gifts given through crowdfunding tax deductible?
Yeah, 2 great questions. Are there fees involved? Yes, and they range pretty dramatically. So We Raise is trying to appeal particularly to Christian congregations, so their fees are just the credit card fees, which are 2 or 3%, something like that. And then the fees. And often, though, the platforms will give discount rates to nonprofits. And yes, there are ways, again, depending on the different platform you're using, for them. If you're approved as a nonprofit, or which churches are, then those gifts, if the gifts are going to someplace tax deductible, then they can continue to be tax deductible. Great.
Someone online compares crowdfunding to what small towns already do when someone in the community gets sick.
Yeah, that's a good example. Yeah, this is like, I talked earlier about electronic giving is a tool. I think crowdfunding sort of connects to the spirit that already exists in our communities and then extends that spirit to broader communities. So it's a tool in that just you can click through, but it also, I think it pushes us to think about new ways of giving. I think about new possibilities.
All right, that takes up our time.
Thanks
Thank you
so
very
much.
much. Much appreciated.